Welcome to our course on building a website from scratch in under 1 hour. My name is Lawrence and I'm excited to have the opportunity to present this course to you today. So within this course, I'm going to be showing you how you can build an amazing looking website really quickly and easily utilizing Bootstrap and Bootstrap 4 framework in order to develop your website. So this is going to be based around HTML code, bringing in Bootstrap CSS classes, and then finally we're also going to include some JavaScript, jQuery, and some additional Bootstrap components that are based around jQuery. So one of them that you see here below is going to be the Google Maps API. So this is a really useful component that you can add to your web page in order to allow your visitors to be able to navigate and actually locate your position on a map. So if you have an actual physical location, this is a great thing to include on a map to help users be able to find out where you're located. So in this case, I've included on every page within the website. I've also created a contact form, a quick showcase gallery here. So this is a Bootstrap carousel here. So default functionality within the carousel, and it's really easy to bring this into your web pages. We're also going to be looking at how we can bring images into Bootstrap, how we can style those, and so on. We're also going to be interested in looking at how we can make our web pages responsive, because one of the main things and the coolest things about Bootstrap is that it builds responsive web pages. So what we're looking at right now is, as I adjust the website, the navigation menu resizes, the images resize, and everything looks proper depending on what size screen you're coming in at. So even on mobile devices, your web page will look fantastic when you utilize Bootstrap. And also the navigation menu, so now we've got the same options as we did before, it's just on a smaller screen and scaled properly. So this is what Bootstrap can do, and you can build amazing websites just like this with a little bit of HTML and bring Bootstrap into your projects. And I'm going to show you how to do this. So when you're ready, let's get ready to start creating some amazing websites from scratch. Within this lesson, I want to provide a quick overview of some of the resources that I'm going to be utilizing in order to rapidly develop a website from scratch. So first of all, I've got my editor open here, and I've created a blank index.html page. So if you're looking to use the same editor that I'm going to be using within the course, I'm using Brackets. There's a number of other editors out there as well. The reason I'm using Brackets is it's an Adobe product. It's free, it's open source, works across different platforms. So it's a really good utility, and if you are looking for a new web editor, this is a great one to try out. Some of the other resources that I'm going to be using within the course, I'm going to be using Chrome as my browser. And the reason that I like Chrome is because we've got access to DevTools. So on a Windows machine, it's Control-Shift-I, and DevTools gives you the ability to communicate some information from your source code into your console using JavaScript, as well as you get a whole overview of the different elements. You can see CSS and so on. So there's a lot of good information here, and I'm going to be making use of it throughout the course as well. So this course is based around building a website using HTML and a little bit of CSS, and we're going to be using Bootstrap as our main framework for building out the website. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Bootstrap, Bootstrap allows us to apply a bunch of classes into our HTML and have styling, pre-built styling within those classes, and really builds web projects in a really rapid, mobile-first, responsive way. And basically what that means is that when we link to the Bootstrap library, we get access to all those classes, and then within the classes we have options to format our HTML code. And I'm going to be showing you how to use that within this course as well. Some of the other resources that I'm going to be using throughout the course, so I'm going to be linking to a jQuery library, so I'm using a CDN, so this is just a web file web library here. I'm going to be getting it from developers.google, and they've got a bunch of the popular libraries listed here. So I'm going to be taking this jQuery code and bring that into my project. Another resource that I'm going to be using Blind Text Generator. So this is going to give me the ability to generate some default text in order to use it as placeholder text within my website to give it a more real feel to it. As well, I'm going to be using images from Lorem Pixel, so same idea, just dummy images that I'm going to be placing within my web project to make it look and feel more real. Another one of the resources that we're using within this course is I'm going to be using Google Maps API, and I'm going to be showing you how to add a simple map location into your web page. So this could be used for visitors to your website. If you have actually a physical location, then you can use that marker, use the coordinates, place a marker on the map so that users can find out where you're located. So all of these resources we're going to be utilizing throughout the course, and we're going to be building out this amazing website from scratch. So in the next lesson, let's begin writing some code. In this lesson, the first thing that I wanted to do is set up my basic Bootstrap template. So this is my index page that I've already created, and I'm ready to go to start adding in my HTML code. So the first thing that I like to do is start with the doc type, and this is just basically indicating that we've got a document HTML5 type file here that we're going to be working with. Then open up the HTML tags, close those off. Start out by creating your head. So head tags, open and close. And then within here, I like to usually use some of the meta information. So I like to set the character set, so UTF-8. I also want to set the viewport. So the viewport is important, especially when web visitors come to view your web content on a mobile device or a different size screen. So this helps resize that screen to the device width. So default sets it to the device width and scales it to 1. So shrink to fit, no. So all of this stuff really does help out with how your content gets output within a mobile device. We should also always add in the XUA compatible, i.e. Edge. So this is for the new version of Internet Explorer. So if you have any compatibility issues, this will help out as well. And then of course, I like to include a title. So this is going to be Bootstrap website. And this is all we really need here within the head section. Now next, I'm going to set up the body tags. So I've got the spacing for the body information here. So what I wanted to do now is go over to Bootstrap and pick up some of the CDNs for Bootstrap 4. So let's open up our browser, go over to the Bootstrap website, and conveniently they've included the Bootstrap CDN here. So I'm just going to grab that. And so this is for the CSS library. And I'm going to bring that in. Now, we don't always necessarily need to include jQuery. So if you're just looking at using the Bootstrap classes and you don't want any of the jQuery component functionality, such as the modals and carousels and so on, then you don't have to include the Bootstrap jQuery. But for this case, I usually do like to include it, and in case I do want to have access to it, I've got it all set up and ready to go. So first of all, in order to include the Bootstrap JavaScript library, the Bootstrap library is based around jQuery, so we've got to access jQuery first. So we need to link to the jQuery library, first step to bring in the Bootstrap JavaScript, and then we've got the JavaScript file here as well, so we can bring that in. So this is bringing in all of that Bootstrap functionality, and there's actually going to be one other file that we need to bring in order to have it not throw any errors, and this is going to be a tether file. So this is available at cloudflare.com, and currently at the moment we do need this tether file because this Bootstrap JavaScript file is going to be looking for some of the pieces within tether, and tether is essentially used for tooltips. So if you're not using any of the tooltips in Bootstrap, and if you leave out the tether, you're going to see an error within your console, but everything else is still going to work properly. So the tether essentially is for additional functionality within your JavaScript Bootstrap library. So there we go. So we're all ready to go. We've created our default Bootstrap website, saved it. Now we can go over and we could take a look at it. And of course, we don't have any content in there as of yet. So this is coming up in the next lesson. That's where we're going to start working and adding some visual content for web visitors. So that's coming up. So now we're ready to go and start adding in some visual content within our web project. So every website needs a navigation bar. So this is what we're going to set up first within our Bootstrap framework. So with Bootstrap 4, there has been some changes to the navigation framework. So I'm going to highlight those as we go through the building of this. So essentially, we're setting up a class, calling it navbar. So this is what's from before as well. And we've got some options as to our navbar colors now. So I'm going to use navbar dark. And so there's navbar dark, navbar light. And the difference is that we need to specify what color code we want, what color of text we want to use. That's what this is doing, the navbar dark and navbar light. So if I do something like background primary, which is also new with Bootstrap 4, you're going to see that now whenever I refresh it, which we don't have any text in there, but we can see that we get the background color of blue. So new with Bootstrap 4 is the ability to set background colors, and then we also have this navbar light or navbar dark, which gives us the ability to update the text accordingly. So let's go ahead and add in some additional content in here. So I want to set up a div, and I'm going to give it a class. So this is going to be part of the content that collapses. So I'm going to give it a class of collapse. So this again, this is a Bootstrap class. And another one of the changes within Bootstrap is that now with navbar, we need to specify, so we've got navbar toggleable, and we need to specify on what size screen it's toggleable. So that's the big change when it comes to Bootstrap 4, is we've got a whole lot more control with the different sizing of the screens, and the different classes all have these specifications on the screen size. And we didn't have that with Bootstrap 3, so now we've gotten more control on the sizes. So that's why I'm adding that in there. And now we've got the ability to actually toggle some of this content. So I'm also going to add in a logo. So this is just going to be a span, and maybe this can keep a placeholder for some of our logo information for this website. Another thing that I want to do is I want to identify this particular div, because we're going to need to identify it with the toggle button. So let's give it a name. So this is going to be the name for our toggleable content, our navbar toggleable content. So nav and I'm just going to call it nav tog, so that we know that this is where the contents of our content that's going to get toggled is going to be. So just going back to the different colors now, so notice that when we say dark, we get dark text, and whenever we switch this to light, we're going to get accordingly light text. So this is all depending on what. So let's go ahead and add in some text here, as well as give this one an ID so that we can identify it. So remember, again, this is going to be the element that's going to hold the collapsible content. So let's give it an ID. So I'm going to give it nav tog for the toggleable navigation items. Also within here, I want to create a span, and maybe this can be some logo or some type of information. So Bootstrap 4 now has another class as well. So this class is going to be called navbar brand, and this is going to indicate any content that we want to do branding for. So let's go out and take a look at what we've got now. So now when I look at it, I've got this white text, blue background, and so going back again to the navbar dark, if I flip this to navbar light, we can see that now it's going to be assuming that the background is light, so it's going to give you dark colored text. And the opposite was navbar dark, so that way the text is a light color. So background primary is the default blue, and now with Bootstrap we can use all the different background colors that we want as well. So we've also got warning and so on. So these are the typical Bootstrap colors that are available to us, and we can really utilize these within background colors now with Bootstrap 4. So let's continue to build out our navigation bar. So now we've got a logo there, and we also need to list out some of the links that we're going to be using within our navigation bar. So I'm going to create some spacing for that, create an unordered list. So this unordered list is actually going to be our nav bar. So we've got to give it a class. So these are all default Bootstrap classes, and you need to include all of these classes in order to build out a navigation bar. So now there's quite a lot of different classes that we're utilizing right now, but I really did want to jump in and show you what can be done with Bootstrap. So bring in the power of Bootstrap. So I am going to review these classes as well. So this class nav is different than navbar because this is just for a regular navigation class, allowing you to style your content as regular navigation items. So just to give you a sample of that, so I'm going to do list items. So we know that within unordered lists we want to have a series of list items, and Bootstrap 4 again has a new class for that so that we can identify, or better, so that it can better identify what we see as the list items within Bootstrap. And so we've also typically within a menu, you're going to have a hyperlink going out to whatever part of the page, whatever link page you want to link to. And we also need to include a class for this as well. So nav link is going to be the class that I'm including, and we'll just shut that over and we'll just say link 1. So now let's go take a look at this within our browser, and I'll show you what this looks like. So there we go. So we've got our first link sitting there, and because it's just a nav, there's a differentiation between a nav bar and a nav. So I'll show you actually what the difference is here, and I'll show you what it's going to look like without the specific classes in Bootstrap. So let's create several other list items. I'm going to just bring them back in line over here, and give this one a link to 2 and a link to 3. So notice that we keep them all as nav items. We don't have any increment on the different list items. So now when I refresh it, we see we've got link 1, link 2, link 3, but it really doesn't look good because it's not aligning it properly. So even though it knows that this is a nav list, it doesn't necessarily know that it's a nav bar unless we specify nav bar, and this is a nav bar nav. So that's the class there. So when we change that, then right away it takes the characteristics of a navigation bar. And with Bootstrap, we can also move things around. So typically with CSS, we'd have to float it over to the right hand side, but Bootstrap gives us a class for that. And again, we do have the option now within Bootstrap 4 to specify screen sizes, so we can specify that we want it to float over to the right hand side on small screens. So that's what this class does. We also have the option to do left and so on, or we can also adjust when we want this breaking point to happen. So we could do it on large screens if we wanted to. So I'll show you what the difference here is going to be. So now when I refresh it, we see that we're pulled over to the right hand side on the large screens, but whenever we hit that breaking point, notice how these items here are now going to shift over to the left hand side. And that's because we've set our breaking point to LG. So typically for something like this, we probably wouldn't want it to move over unless unless maybe it's a small screen or something like that we're trying to save that space. So again, it's all a matter of preference and design, but Bootstrap gives you all of the capabilities here in order to implement it. And another thing you might have just noticed there, that whenever I shrink it down, it disappears there, the content disappears there, and that's because we've set it to this navbar toggleable excess. And basically what that means is that whenever we hit that small size, that we're going to set it up to be toggled. And in the next lesson, I'm going to show you to add that toggle button, because now that we're hiding it, we actually do need to make it toggle. We need to have a button to open that navigation menu back up. So that's coming up in the next lesson. In the last lesson, we showed you how you can create a navigation bar fully styled using the Bootstrap classes. Now, whenever we collapse it, we're still missing a way to open up and uncollapse this navigation bar, which we would typically expect on the smaller screens. And Bootstrap gives you full control to take care of this, and it's got a lot of great options for this. So typically, we might use a button element in order to do this, and again, the magic really happens within the classes. So everything with Bootstrap is related to these classes, and this is where Bootstrap picks up the information that it needs in order to make all of these actions happen. So this class is called navbar toggler. So that means that it's a toggler for the toggleable class down here just below. And we are going to hook these together. I'm going to show you how. So again, we've got that option to hide it. So we can do hidden, and we're going to hide it on SM up. So if we don't hide it, it's going to be always visible. And this is again new with Bootstrap 4, where we've got the ability to set that breakpoint whenever we want this navigation bar to show up. So let's do buttons. So we need to specify that this is a type button. We've got also some attributes here. So these are Bootstrap attributes that you need to include for your toggle button to be able to work. So the first one is that it's a data toggle collapse, so that Bootstrap understands, or the web browser can understand and relate that this is the action that we want to take with this button whenever it gets clicked. So it's going to pick up all of these attributes and information accordingly when we've got these classes in place. So data target is another super important one, and this is where we need to specify that we're targeting to nav tog. So whatever we had given this ID, make sure that we're setting it up as that to be the target. And then let's shut this down, and we'll take a look at it within the browser. So when I refresh it, so I get my navigation toggle bar there, and whenever it shrinks down. So notice that it's not quite working yet, so we still have to finish that hookup, but essentially we've got our button showing up whenever we shrink down to the size of the screen. Whenever we enlarge it, then we get all of these items showing back up. So let's update the one mistake that's left here. And if this is important to note that when you are specifying a data target, it doesn't actually know what target this is. So it doesn't know if this is an ID or a class or a tag. So we need to specify it just as we would with CSS, where we include that hash. And this is something that is going to be used over and over within Bootstrap, and a lot of times people leave these out, so it is important to include that hash in order for Bootstrap to be able to identify this as a button. So now when we click it, everything's working and working properly. So I did want to highlight that we need to make sure the data target relates to the element that we have here, and in this case we're using ID to identify it, so make sure that everything hooks up properly. So just as a quick overview, what we've done here, this is essentially the nav element, the navbar element. So in order to use a nav bar, we need to specify that this is a nav bar. This stuff over here, this is just for coloring. So even if I was to remove that, we still get all of the same functionality, but of course we can't see our button there because we haven't specified any colors. So this is something to keep in mind, and we don't have to include this background color. So we can do something where we can set a color, we can set it up in our CSS and create our own color, or we can add an inline style, and we could do something like background color and do something like red. So we can pick now with Bootstrap we've got a lot more options for the background colors. So if you want red, there you go, that's how you do red. And if you pick a color that is a light color, then make sure that you're specifying that the navbar dash light is the color of the font. So this just specifies the color of the font, and then the other one we're specifying the background. The stuff over here, so this button is linking to this element over here, and what we're doing is make sure that you include these two attributes. The first one indicates what this button class is all about. It's a collapse button, and where our target of this collapse. So linking it over to this ID. Over here, we're specifying that this is a navbar toggler, and we don't have to hide it going up, but it's always a good idea because then it just doesn't look right if we don't hide it. So that's the reasoning for hiding it. And usually when you're hiding it, you keep it in line with this toggleable. So if I was to change this to MD, we could change this to SM, and now our breaking points would be different. So whenever we shrink it down, so we're not quite as small when we're shrinking it down. And then of course you have to adjust these accordingly as well, because we're still floating SM right. So then this one would have to be changed to MD, so it's in line with that. Going back over here, refreshing it, and now we see everything is aligned properly again. So with Bootstrap 4, they gave us more control with the breaking points, but it's also quite a bit more here with getting everything to work in line. So a lot of times it's just some small adjustments that you need to do. Then over here with the unordered list, this is where we have our actual links within the nav bar. So we've got nav, and we saw how without the navbar nav that they're not floating over to the right hand, or they're not in line. So we need to include that to make sure that it's a horizontal navigation bar, and then we also float it over to the right. So we saw that we can position it to where we want it to be. Make sure that our list items include nav item, and of course we need to include the nav link in order for Bootstrap to be able to understand that this is the styling that it's expecting, that every one of these list items, if it has a link, it should be indicated that these are the links. So now that we've gotten one of the more complex parts of the website set up and running, now the rest of it is just designing it the way that we want. So next lesson, we're going to design some of the website content. So again, depending on what you want to do with your website, if you want to have how many columns you want to have in your website, and so on. This is so easy to do with Bootstrap using the grid setup. So we're going to be taking you through that in the upcoming lesson. In this lesson, I want to add in some additional elements here for sections within our web page. So I'll start by creating a div and give it a class of container. So within Bootstrap, we have two options. We can do container, or we could do container fluid. So the difference here is how much of the actual space within that particular element we're going to be allocating to this web page. So container is more of a restricted space as opposed to container fluid. So I can just basically show you what this could look like. I'm going to quickly throw in some more divs here. So this div is to break apart our first row. And Bootstrap, when you're creating Bootstrap, whenever you want to do any kind of structure where you've got multiple rows, multiple columns, it's got really good functionality for that. So we start by defining that we're starting a brand new row, and let's say we want to have 3-column website. So Bootstrap is based on a 12-column system. So 12 divided by 3 is 4. So we set COL is the class, here is what it actually hasn't changed from the previous version of Bootstrap. So COL dash whatever size of screen we're looking at, we want the breakpoint. So I want to break this at MD. So I'm going to set COL-MD, and I'm going to specify 4 as the number of columns that I want it to take up. So section 1. And just creates, we'll create the other 2 sections as well. So I'm going to just copy and paste that out. So now we've got section 2 and section 3. So I'm going to do some quick CSS. I'm going to add some CSS in here. So style. So this is just in order to be able to see the border. So let's just give it a class of ABC. And we'll give it a border, one pick, solid black, so that we can see wherever we're ending these particular elements. And maybe we want to also do a background color as well. So background color, and let's just make it really DDD or something like that. So now whenever I apply this, so that this we can see where the container is, and maybe we also want to take a look at and see where these columns are. So let's open up our web page, and now we can see essentially this is what the column, what it's going to look like when we're using a regular container. And so the other option is to do container fluid, and so essentially there's 2 different types of web pages on the larger screen. So container fluid is just going to stretch out all of these sections across that entire available space that we have for the web page. So we see that section 1, 2, 3, now it's spread across nice and evenly across. So if we got rid of that, then we go back down to more of a constrained width. So we see that these move in, we've got gutters at the side and so on. So again, depending on what your design is calling for, you could use container or container fluid. But in this case, usually I like to use container because I do like to have all of the white space here at the side. But again, this is all depending on what your design calls for. So now I can get rid of this, because now that we see where it's located, we don't necessarily need to use it at the moment. So I'm going to just remove that, refresh it, and now they're all going to go white. So we're all ready to go to continue to build out our web page and add in some content here. So we're going to add in some dummy content, maybe some images, and so on. So all of this is coming up in the next set of lessons. So working with Bootstrap, it gives us a super amount of flexibility, especially when it comes to these column widths. So let's say, for instance, we still want a 3-column website, but we want to shrink down the 2 side columns and have more space within that center section. So that's really easily done and adjusted here within Bootstrap. And the other good thing about Bootstrap is that it's mobile friendly, all ready to go. So we see here that once we hit that breaking point of MD, we see that the columns actually start to stack one on top of the other. So that's all that the center part says. Is this gives us an indication of when the website needs to stack, and I do have my screen size enlarged to 250%. So that's so I'm going to change it to small so that we get a little bit more time with the different sections before we actually break and we get them stacked one on top of the other. So now within this lesson, let's continue to build out our web page, and let's add in some images. And with Bootstrap, you've got some options to style some images as well. So let's take a look at those. Open up our content here. We're going to use some of these lorem pixel images. So I've got this one over here. So maybe we'll just copy that source code, and we'll dump some images into these sections. So one image there, and maybe I want to have another image down here. I don't want this one to be the exact same, and maybe this one was going to be a super huge image. So I'll show you how Bootstrap can handle that as well. Also, let's add in some text content here. So I'm just going to copy some of this out and create maybe a paragraph here with some content and so on. So actually this should probably go in the center center section, because that would just make more sense. And maybe we've got maybe 2 paragraphs of content in there, because we got lots of space in the center section. So there we go. So now we've got our different sections, but oops, we see that our images are flowing over to the different sections. So our images aren't responsive yet. And the good thing about Bootstrap is they have us covered for this. We do have the ability to update those images and make them fluid. And now with Bootstrap 4, we also have the ability to specify, we can specify some additional classes as well. And we can also float the text and a whole lot more. So let's open up the editor and we'll make some adjustments on these images. So we see that this image source here, let's add in our Bootstrap class. So it's Bootstrap class, and we need to specify that we want this image to be fluid. So the class is image img-fluid. So just like that container was fluid, and now once we set it to image fluid, we see that now that image becomes responsive. We still need to take care of that other image, add in that same class so that both of our images are responsive. So basically what it's doing is setting a max width 100, so it doesn't matter what images we're loading, what size they are by default. It's only going to allow to load up to the amount of width that's available within that cell. So we also have ability to update some of our images and align them as well. We can round the corners, so we can float it over to the left or over to the right, and we also need to specify that size as well. So let's create one of these, take one of these images, and I'm going to place it somewhere in the text here. And I'm also add in fluid image, but I'm also going to float it over to the left hand side. So much like what we did over here whenever we did our float MD right, we're going to do float XS left. So basically that means that it's always going to float over to the left, but because we got lots of space, so I do need to cut the size of that image. So maybe this image is 200 by 200. So refresh that and we'll try that again. So we see that we can float the images to the left, we can float them to the right, get them in line with the text, also get them to to fit responsively into the available spacing that we have within our web page, and we see as we adjust, the image sizes adjust as well. So Bootstrap makes it really easy to be responsive. So another thing with images, with Bootstrap 3, we had some additional options with images where we could round them and so on. So Bootstrap 4 has made some adjustments to that. So we do have the ability to do rounded. So this is a separate class. So we could do something, if we wanted this one to be rounded, we could add in that option for rounding of it. We also have the ability to set image thumbnail. So if we want to come out and look like a thumbnail, then we can set it as a thumbnail. So that's going to adjust. So I've adjusted this one to be rounded, and I've adjusted this one to be a thumbnail format. So we see that there are updates here. So this rounded corners here, we've got more of a thumbnail format between the text there. That's how you create images within Bootstrap. Next section, we're going to complete this this particular page, and we're going to add a footer, and we're also going to then look into how we can add map API in order to give location of where we're located at. So you might want to include that on every page or maybe the contact page, but for this instance we're going to create it here below within that footer section. So all of this is coming up in the next set of lessons. In this lesson, we want to complete our web page by building out the footer and setting up our mapping area. So notice that we do have a class container. This is an important one to note because depending on what your design is calling for and how you want to create your footer, if you want your footer to be in line with the contents of your container, then you would keep that within that container section, or you could create another div here and give it a class container. So those would be in line as well. The other option is to add it in within this container, or you could do a container fluid if you want to go all the way across. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a separate div. I'm going to give it a class of container, and then so this is going to give me some more flexibility, and especially if I'm creating a website where I may or may not necessarily have that same container div here. That's another reason to create all of your footer, because this footer content could potentially be across all pages, whereas the one above might not need to be across. So this one here could be changed depending on what page the user's landing on. And that's the reason why I want to have this differentiation here between the sections. So let's create couple sections here. So maybe we can have one called section, and then within here we'll have div ID, and this is where we're going to place our Google map. So that's going to live within this element, and then just below that maybe we'll have something called footer. So this will be our web page footer, and then within here we can add in our footer content. So again, this is going to be going across the entire page. So I'm going to just create a div here to hold the contents of it, and maybe we can do our copyright and company name or something like that, or website. So now we've got all of our content here. We're all ready to go to add in our map. We refresh it, we've got our copyright and so on. So typically with the footer you might have a different color or so on. So let's add in a class and background, and we'll do primary. So maybe you want to have a blue background to your footer, so you can do it that way as well. So really easy to make these adjustments, or of course you can set your own classes within your CSS. So let's just call this footer. And I know this might be confusing here. We've got a tag footer and a class footer. So I'm going to bring that into my CSS footer background, give it a height. And let's check this out now, so let's see how that looks. So now this looks more like a footer, and of course we could add in all of our content here and so on. We can also do things like we can center the text. So if you want the text centered, we could do that as well. And with Bootstrap 4, we also have the option to center our text depending on our screen size. So this is new again, but I think for this instance, we're just going to do text, and we're going to just specify XS. So basically this will center the text, doesn't matter what size screen we're on, so center the text that's within that footer section. And we could be more specific as well and bring that class over to the div if we want to. And that's the reason why I created that extra div, because just in case we want to do it that way. And in case we want to break apart our footer with some additional content as well. So now, in the next lesson, I'm going to show you I can update this mapping component, and we're going to be utilizing the Google Maps API. So they do have some code here, and I'm going to show you what this code will do and how you can bring it into your web page, and how you can actually place a marker on the map in order to indicate wherever your business is located. So that's coming up in the next set of lessons. In this lesson, I want to show you how you can bring Google Map API into your web project. So just looking at this, we can sign up for Google Maps over at developer.google/maps, and you can sign up here to get your Map API key. Now with a Map API key, you could use it to monitor your application, and you'll also need it if you want to take a license on it. But if you don't include it, then you can also use the Google Map, but it's always better to register and set your application up with the Google Map. So that way, whenever you're linking over to the source, you're linking over to your Map API key. The first thing that you need to do is bring that Google library into your web project. So we already have all of the jQuery functionality and so on. So let's add in the Maps Google apis.com maps API.js, and we're going to go with version 3. So now we've brought in the Google Maps library, and of course when we go to the web page, we're not going to see anything different. We can go over to our console. There's no errors that are being thrown. So we do have, there is actually a warning here. So this isn't an error, it's a warning. It's a slight difference here, but it's going to tell us that we have no API key. So again, if you're going to be using it within a web page and you're going to be using it a lot, just register your API key and add the Google library within this type of format where you do $key. So let's go ahead and write up our code where we're going to populate this element here with a Google map. So let's add in our script tags here, and with this map what we want to do is we want to make sure that it's actually loaded. So we're going to listen for a Google, so this is all part of the Google object that we brought in from this particular library. So we're doing Google Maps event, and we're adding a DOM listener. And we're listening on the window object. We're listening for it to load, and we want to run a function once it's loaded, so init. So typically we use function name init once it's initialized, so just stick with that. And then we need to set up that function that's going to fire off when this particular event gets triggered. So this is the init function, and so this is going to initiate and create the map content. So let's go take a look at this, just make sure that everything is loading properly. I usually like to check to see if I'm getting console errors. So everything looks correct. Of course, we're still getting that no API key issue there as well. So now let's set up some variables. So variable, so wherever your coordinates are for your business, this is where you could set these. So this would be lat and lon, so I'll just call it LAL, and it's going to equal to, so these are the parameters used within the Google map. So we can set a latitude and a longitude. So if you know your latitude and you know your longitude, this is where the map marker is going to sit. So it's going to sit at maybe 108. I'm actually not sure where this is going to end up, but we'll just give it a shot with a latitude and a longitude of 108. And now let's create the map object. So set a variable, call it map, because this is going to be our brand new map object. So we do new Google Maps dot map to create the map object, and let's set it up in the document get element by ID, and then this is where we need to identify that element that we want to contain that particular map. So we've called it map, so that's where we need to identify it, and now we just need to add in the rest of the parameters. So we've got some options here how we want to present that map content. So we can set a bunch of parameters here as well. Some of them, things like zoom. So these are default parameters that are available within the Google Maps. We can also center it. So we want to center that map on these coordinates. So I'm taking the coordinates LAL, and that's where we're going to set those, the center of the map. You could also bring those in as well and just create it as an object there. Go out to the web page, refresh it, and we'll take a look at that and see what this looks like. So there's one other additional thing that we do need to set, and we need to set some styling for this particular map element. So right now we've got our map element there. And let's go up to where we're setting our styling. We're going to locate that map element and add some styling to it. So what you want to do, typically you want to set a width for it. So set width of it to 400 pixels or whatever makes sense for it for your website design. So height 400 pixels. And maybe we could even do something like a background color if we want, of course. We could also do it by percentage as well. So again, whatever makes sense. And typically if it's a responsive site, you might want to do it within percentages. So this is a background color, and this is in case the map doesn't load. So just do a gray color. So now whenever we go out to our web page, let's refresh it and see where our map ends up. So now we've got this map object here. We've got some styling applied to it. And there we go. So now we've centered our map. So it looks like we're ending up somewhere in China. So maybe let's do, instead of a map 400, let's do 100%, or we could center it. I'm actually going to get rid of the width, and I think the only one that you do need is height. So let's give it a height of 200 pixels, and now let's go back out and take a quick look at that and see what this ends up. So if you don't set default width, it's just going to automatically take 100%, and it's going to build out that map object here. So it's just taking a few seconds here to load out. So another thing we might need to do is we need to add in a marker. So let's go ahead and add that marker in. So going back down to here where we're setting up our original source code, we've got our map that we've set up, and now let's do the marker object. So this is another object similar to what we did with our map. So just call it marker, and we're going to do new Google Maps marker, and specify the parameters of the marker that we want to create. So it's going to be this same thing where we need to position it. So position, and it's a good thing that we set up that position within this object here, the LAL. So now we can set that position, and we can position the map with that particular marker. So this is just the container of the marker. So let's see where we ended up, where we set that marker. So we probably, so you have to figure out where your latitude and longitude is, and that's how you can set up your map and of course center your map. So by default, your map is always going to be centered within this particular page. So maybe we want it to set our latitude to -40. Just a quick update there, refresh it, and now we can see where we end up. So we're ending up almost in Australia as a latitude. And of course, we can update the longitude as well. And again, this is just all random here. I'm actually not sure where I'm ending up with this map, but it is kind of fun to play around and see where you end up with latitude and longitude. And I'm going to take one more try at this. I'm copying what they had within the Google parameters there for latitude and longitude. So one more shot at it. And of course, we can change all of these parameters, the zoom level, and so on. So in this case, we're ending up in Australia, and the zoom level was 5 in that case as well. So in the next lesson, we're going to finish off this project. I'm going to show you how you can make some additional pages really easily at this point now, now that you've set up your basic template for Bootstrap. Add in your other maybe 2 pages that you have in your website, update some of this content, and so on. So that's coming up in the next section. This lesson, I want to complete our web page template so we can link out to a number of different pages. I have one page for index, so this is going to link out to my index.html. Over here, I'm going to have show, so this is going to be basically to showcase maybe some products. So we'll add something in there, and then this is going to be contact.html. So this is going to be for our contact page. So now index is the way that we want it to look. Let's update our showcase page. So first thing I want to do is just save this entire web page as show.html. I've just saved it as show.html, and in this case what I want to do is I want to completely update what I've got here within this particular div. So I'm going to get rid of that, get rid of all of this stuff, and I'm going to add in a carousel in its place. So a carousel is just one of those image rotators where you can demonstrate, possibly if I've got some showcase images that I want to really highlight, I can add those in here. So let's add them in within this particular div. I'm going to give it an ID. So every carousel, you need to set up an ID in order to identify it. So care images or some car images or something like that. So that now we have an identifier. Let's give it a class. So this class is going to be on the parent container, and the class is carousel slide. And we need to set up an attribute here. So for this carousel, just keep in mind that you do need the Bootstrap JavaScript in order to get it working. So carousel, so the data right is carousel. So I'm just updating this parent to have that information. So next we need to create all of our inner carousel items. So let's do div, and let's set up a class for this as well. So this is going to be a class called carousel inner, and we can close that one off, and then within here we can list out all of our inner items. And there are some slight changes now with Bootstrap 4 in order to accomplish a carousel. So we can, just making sure I've got all of my divs here properly. So I think it looks like I've ended up with an extra div here. So let's remove that one there. So carousel inner, so there are some slight changes to the way the carousels work. We specify carousel items within Bootstrap 4, so class and carousel item. So this is for each image that you have within your carousel. Starting one is given an additional class of active, and then within here I can specify my image source, and let's give it a source. Let's just do placehold it. So that's another one like the lorem pixel where you can get images. I'm going to get a really wide image and multiply it by 500 pix and close that off. So let's duplicate that out so these ones aren't active. And now let's go into our web project and take a look at, see what we've got now. So when I refresh it, I've got my showcase here. So I've got my carousel there. So right now I don't as yet, so I'm not sure, we've got to take a look and see why we're getting technical issues there, but it doesn't seem like that's loading properly. So that's another thing that we're going to take a look at. So it looks like I should update this map API, so let's just do that quickly. So I've got my key in here, so I can update it, so JS key, and now we're doing callback to init, which is that same function I've got here. So I can remove that, and now when I refresh it, this should take care of this issue here that we've been having with Google, trying to force us to use the API key. So of course, always better to use that API key library instead of just trying to link out as I was doing. So now we've made an update to that, and we can go ahead and update the rest of our carousel for Bootstrap. So going back to Bootstrap and our Bootstrap functionality, so we set up all those carousel items. They are rotating here. We see it if we watch it long enough, we'll see that rotation. But we're still missing those typical where you've got the carousel indicators as well as carousel controls, so you can actually control which images you get to view. So I'm going to show you how to update those as well. So let's open up our editor. And first of all, let's set up our carousel indicators. So the carousel indicators are usually those see-through type circles that you see, and they help you guide you through the number of pages that you have within the carousel. So this can be done with an ordered list, I should say, and the class for this, another default Bootstrap class, carousel indicators. So I believe with Bootstrap 3 we had indicator, so now we've got indicators. So just make sure that you are aware that with Bootstrap 4 there are some changes here. So list item, so data. So again, this is an attribute that helps specify what element we want to control. So this is where that ID is ever so important, because we need a way to link to that. So now that we've got that link, we've made that connection, one more attribute, data slide to, and essentially this is going to slide it to whatever item within that particular order it is here. So essentially it's going to slide it to 0, 1, 2, so that we just have to make those updates. Class is active, so this one's by default active, so make sure that we set that active. Close that off, and it's going to actually build up all of these list items itself, so we don't have to worry about that. Remove that that active class. Also update the slide to 1, slide to 2. Let's go back out here, and now we see that we've got the ability to have these indicators here where we're located. And also make sure that we indicate that these are going to IDs, the data targets. So let's try this out, refresh it, check it out, and so now we've got our carousel working. I'm going to roll that up to the top there. So now we've got all of that working, and lastly, let's add in some controls on the left and the right of the carousel. So we'll do that here just below the carousel inner part. We're just going to add a couple elements here. So they're going to be anchors, class. So this one is going to be class left, carousel control. So that's the class, and then now we need to indicate what we want to do with it. So we need to href it to the ID from up above there, so the main parent object, and we'll do data slide, and we need to specify where we're sliding it. So this one's sliding to previous, and we'll just shut that over there. So we can also specify different icons as well that we might want to utilize. So there are some default icons within Bootstrap, so span, class, and this icon is going to be icon previous. And let's try that out, see what that looks like. So we've set up the left one, so we can move to the previous ones. And now to set up the right one, so this is just going to be the opposite that we would do here. So it's going to be right carousel control, and we're going to slide it to next, and the icon instead of previous is going to be next. So let's go now and refresh it. So that will give us the icon on the right, icon on the left. We can use any one of these indicators as well to move through all the different elements there that are available. And then of course we've got our map working properly now because I added in the key. So next lesson we're going to finish it off with our last page, so we have our contact page in order to complete our web project. In this lesson, I want to complete our web project, so our last page that we needed to create is a contact page. So what I did, I took Showcase, duplicated it, called it contact.html, and removed out the carousel stuff. So let's start by creating a form tag. And then within the form tag, I'm going to create a div, give it a class of form group. So this is Bootstrap. A Bootstrap class helps you group together the input content. So that means that grouping together elements like label. So here we need to specify for and the ID of the input that we want to label. So in this case, it's going to be your name. Let's create that input. So this is going to be type text and class. So another Bootstrap class, it's form control. Give it an ID of name, because we use name within the label as well in order to bring that together. And so we can also do things like we can add in a placeholder if we want. So this is just that grayed out part that shows up within that input. So let's maybe take a quick look and see what the contact form looks like. So we've got the your name. So another one, I'm going to just copy this one out and update some of the field names there. So another one that we would typically have is maybe email. So make some quick adjustments. So being HTML5, let's do the email type. Email, your email. And so lastly, we need a submit button as well. So let's just take a quick look at this, make sure that, so we've got our two fields there. So lastly, let's add in a button. So we don't need a form group for the button. I can just do button here at the bottom, type equals submit. So this is just a typical submit button, and in this case, let's use some of the Bootstrap classes. So let's use btn to specify that it creates a button out of this element, and then primary is going to give us that blue button. So send message. And there we go. So now we've completed our input form here for the web user. We can also add some additional styling here, so I could give it a class of my form or something like that, and go up to here and my form, and maybe I wanted to add some padding and stuff around the form. So padding. Let's take a look at that, see what this looks like. So that gives us some padding around there. And I believe I had given it a class myform, not an ID myform, so that's why that wasn't showing up. So now we've got some padding around there. Sometimes you might want to add like a really light border, so one pick solid, and we can do a really light border if we want. We might also want some margins. So maybe do 10 pixels margins, go back out, refresh it. So now it's a more centered type form. And as I said, these are the placeholders, so your name, your email, and so on. So now we've got all of the functionality within all the pages. Everything's working properly, and we've essentially built out our website from scratch. I'm going to zoom it back down to 100% so we can take a closer look at full screen page here and see what our web page looks like. And of course, because this is built in Bootstrap, it's fully responsive. So when I resize it down, everything still works the same. I've got the ability to go to the different pages. So I've got my all of my images styling, I've got my map styling, my form styling. So everything works as expected on the different size screens. And essentially, that's how you can create a website using Bootstrap. I've added in some additional components like the Google Maps API, which you don't have to obviously include unless you want to. And essentially, this is the basics of how to build out a website using Bootstrap. So I advise you check it out for yourself. Take a look through the source code, try it out for yourself, and see what you can make happen with Bootstrap.